I see a victim. I instruct a fellow employee to not enter and call 911. After surveying the scene, it appears to me that the shooter is no longer in the building. If the gunman was still active in the building, the appropriate action is to not help the injured, but to leave the scene. Becoming the next casualty does no one any good. Even law enforcement will not aid victims until the threat has been neutralized, although some response teams may be composed of medical as well as tactical personnel. I'm aware of the availability of a first aid bleeding control kit, and I quickly retrieve it and return to the victim. I open the kit and dump the contents next to the injured person. Instructions are available on the package as well as in a waterproof sheet inside. The instructions are divided into numbered steps that correspond to a clearly marked item in the kit. Let's go over the steps used in treating the wounded with the first aid bleeding control kit. Step 1. Take the item marked number 1 and open the bag. It contains 2 pairs of gloves and a scissors with a blunt end. Quickly put on the gloves. And use the scissors to cut away any clothing that prevents you from seeing the extent of the bleeding wound. Remember that bullet wounds may have an entry wound and an exit wound, and one may be bleeding more than the other. If you have an assistant, have them also put on gloves and open the next items on the list so that they can pass it on to you when you're ready to use it. Step 2. Take the item marked number 2 and remove it from its package. This is a compressed gauze dressing. Open the dressing. Unravel it, and then push it into the wound at the level where the bleeding is occurring. Apply direct pressure with both hands. In cases of venous bleeding, direct pressure may, in and of itself, be sufficient to control bleeding. Use your weight directly over the wound for the best effect. If the gauze dressing soaks completely through, however, proceed to step number 3. This is the only decision to be made while using the first aid bleeding control kit and should be clearly obvious even to those without training. Step 3. Take the item marked number 3 out of its package. If any item is difficult to open because your gloves are slippery from blood, use the scissors to open the package. This item is a SWAT tourniquet, so named because the instructions are in the name. S, stretch, W, wrap, A and T, tuck. Stretch, wrap, and tuck. This tourniquet is one of the simplest to use for those without medical training. Stretch the tourniquet and wrap it tightly around the bleeding extremity, at least 2 to 3 inches or more above the area of the bleed. Avoid placing the tourniquet on joints. If you aren't sure that there is only one wound, place the tourniquet higher on the upper arm or leg. Continue to stretch as you wrap to achieve adequate pressure to stop bleeding. In a terror event such as a bombing, massive hemorrhage, or a traumatic amputation would lead you to place the tourniquet as step number 1. Although some will say to stop if the tourniquet appears to decrease the bleeding, this kit is meant for those without training in schools, workplaces, malls, and elsewhere. Therefore, we want as little decision-making to be involved and suggest going directly to step number 4. Step number 4. Remove the item marked number 4 out of its package. It is called Celox EMS and is comprised of 2 gauze pads that are impregnated with a hemostatic agent. This is a material specifically designed to help clotting and stop bleeding. Wipe away the blood so that the point of the bleeding is clear. Remove the original gauze and place the pads directly over the location of the bleeding vessel. Then apply direct, firm pressure for 3 minutes. If there is a bleeding entry and exit wound, 1 pad may be used in each. If the victim is conscious and can help you, it may be helpful to have them hold pressure while you open the next items. Step 5. Remove the item marked number 5 out of its package. It is another gauze dressing in a roll. Apply it directly over the pads, packing it tightly into the portion of the wound where the blood was spurting. As before, apply pressure. At this point, bleeding should be under control. Step number 6. Remove the item marked number 6 from its package. This item is a mini compression dressing and is essentially an elastic wrap with a sterile pad. Place the pad directly over the wound and wrap it tightly around the extremity. Then secure it with the attached closure clip. To achieve even more pressure, you can twist the dressing as you wrap it around the top of the wound. Step 7. A victim who has significant bleeding can easily go into shock, so place them in the shock position. This is simply accomplished by raising their legs 12 inches above the level of the heart. This will preserve circulation in the body core and the brain. These victims will lose heat rapidly, so use number 7, a 4.5 by 7 foot mylar blanket, to cover them as completely as possible. This will help preserve body heat. Looking at the final result, it won't look very pretty. Most demonstrations of a kit like this are performed on a mannequin, and it's hard to imagine the actual look of a bandaged wound from a major bleed. This is what you can expect it to look like when you're done. The important thing is to stop the flow of blood out of the patient's body until emergency personnel arrive in response to your fellow employee's 911 call. If you did not have someone else who could call 911 before you started these steps, now call 911 and report to them exactly what has happened. Using the First Aid Bleeding Control Kit, you have used several methods that will help you control the bleeding: the tourniquet, the hemostatic agent, and the compression dressing. There will be circumstances where the victim is not bleeding from an extremity, but from a chest wound. In a chest wound, there is not only bleeding, but the potential for a collapsed lung. A hole in the chest lets in air, but this air causes pressure in the chest cavity and prevents the lung from inflating. This victim will experience worsening and shortness of breath. You can help reinflate the lung by improvising a chest seal. Item number 8 is a simple plastic bag with duct tape. Place the rectangular plastic bag over the wound and tape 3 sides only. This will have the effect of allowing air to exit the wound during exhalation, but not enter during inhalation. If there's an entry and an exit wound, cut the bag into 2 pieces and tape over both. This is a temporary solution, but may give time for emergency personnel to arrive.
Hey, if you need a solid medical kit for the range, for that hunting trip, or for disaster settings, check out Nurse Amy's entire line at store.doomandbloom.net. Thanks again.